Seth. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Today I'm joined by Commissioner Scholdice and Secretary Saunders to talk about the property tax rate letter. It comes as no surprise that there's another significant tax increase that was forecasted due to an increase in education spending. It's also exactly why my administration has proposed many ideas over the last 10 years to fix the broken system. As you're all well aware, last session we worked with the legislature to pass a bipartisan bill to transform the education system, create better outcomes for students, provide more resources for teachers, and adopt a new funding system that is more predictable and affordable. In the last 5 years alone, property taxes have increased by over 40%, with fewer kids in our schools, fewer opportunities in the classroom, and more inequities from town to town. Equity, and making sure our kids get a quality education, regardless of where they live, is an important part of the plan we presented last year and the bill that was eventually passed. We knew when we started this process that none of this would be easy, but we all agreed. It was long past time to fix the broken system, because the longer we wait, the harder it gets. Last session, Act 73 was passed, and I was proud to stand with the Republican leadership, as well as Speaker Kowinski, Pro Tem Baruth, Chairs Conlon, Kornheiser, Bongartz, Cummings, and many more, on both sides of the aisle as I signed it into law. From the beginning, I made it clear that change of this magnitude must be bipartisan, and we must be willing to have the courage to see this through, because last November, Vermonters sent a clear message. They've had enough and simply can't afford the status quo any longer. After this week's tax news, we should all remember that message. The way Act 73 is structured, everything is dependent on the legislature approving a new governance structure to reflect the fact that we're now educating 20% fewer K-12 students than we were 20 years ago in order to right-size the system. Although far from easy, we must address funding, governance, and quality all at once, because we've seen well-intentioned efforts of the past fail by doing it piecemeal and only focusing on one of the three parts. Over the last year, we've had good conversations with legislative leaders about education transformation, and I'm ready to follow through on our shared objectives, despite the efforts of those who seem determined to preserve a failing system that promises more of the same, declining test scores, and ever-increasing costs. The choice before lawmakers is clear. We can continue to work together to keep moving forward with our plan, or they can explain to their constituents why double-digit tax increases are acceptable, while inequality grows from region to region and test scores plummet. Despite the headwinds, I'm confident we can once again prove we can do big things by working together and having the courage to follow through. I'll now turn it over to Commissioner Scholdice.
Some of you may have already heard some of my run-up to the increase, but let me just walk you back through it so that you have it, and I'll probably conclude with one example of what this means for the average Vermonter sitting at home. As is required by law, the tax commissioner needs to produce a December 1 letter that is geared towards providing a snapshot on what the anticipated education property tax will be for the coming year. I think it's important to point out that this letter is based upon consensus with input from the Agency of Education, the Department of Finance and Management, the Agency of Administration, but probably most importantly, the Legislative Joint Fiscal Office. The calculations are based upon best estimates in a number of key areas. District level spend for students on cost and education, town grand list values, anticipated statewide cost on items such as special ed and meals, and how much the education fund is forecasted to receive from non-property tax sources, such as sales tax and rooms and meals. I want to underscore that we use the best estimate for these calculations. However, estimates on school budgets aren't final until they're passed. And maybe, based upon this letter, we will see some schools and municipalities take a step in a different direction. It's also important to note that the average property tax change is an average across the state. Individual taxpayers could see something different based upon their individual or municipal situation. A change to their property, whether it has increased value, a municipality that just did a reappraisal, or a school budget spends more or less than what we've used in the assumptions. But most important is that this letter assumes that no other policy changes will be made in the upcoming legislative session or by municipalities between now and town meeting day. The legislature can impact this, as the governor has outlined, and hopefully impact this projected outcome. That all said, with the calculations we've conducted, the average property tax bill in the state of Vermont is proposed to go up nearly 12%, 11.9. And if you take a look at that over the last 20 years, that means or for the purposes of math, there's 15,000 less kids in our system over that 20-year period. And the annual, I don't know if I said this clearly last time we met, the annual increased cost to taxpayers in the state of Vermont is $1 billion over the last 20 years annually. One of the things that was asked the other day when I spoke was, but what does this mean to the average Vermonter sitting listening to this message? So we went back and we took a look at, if you were assumed that your home is on the grand list for $400,000, which by the way is pretty close to what the median is on the grand list right now, your property tax bill is going to go up $720, or over the last 5 years, it will have gone up almost $2,000, about $1,800. I was recently, after we met earlier this week, I went back to my office and my inbox started to get filled up. And the resounding theme that I got when I read those letters was, I don't know where this is going, but I simply can't afford it. I don't know where this money's going to come from. So with that, let me turn it over to Secretary Saunders, and she'll talk about the education components. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I want to start by being very clear about the fact that education transformation in Vermont is not just about property taxes. It is about building and sustaining the best education system in America. At a moment when nearly every other state is diverting dollars away from public education, Vermont has chosen a different path. Earlier this year, a bipartisan coalition passed Act 73, a bill that doubles down on public education as the great equalizer, the pathway out of poverty, and the engine that fuels our economy. Having the best education system in America is not just about test scores. It is about giving every student the opportunity to succeed, regardless of economic disadvantage, language status, and the town they call home. Giving every student in Vermont the opportunity to succeed requires us to ask why these opportunities remain so uneven, why course offerings, per pupil spending, teacher salaries, and academic performance vary so significantly across the state. The root cause of these inequities is a simple but hard truth. We are not organizing or operating our statewide education system well. And because of that, we are not directing resources to the places where they can make the biggest difference for students and supporting teachers to have competitive pay. The good news is that we have a plan. Vermonters have questions, as they should. Will this plan save money? Will this plan actually give students more opportunities? Will this plan better support our teachers? Will this plan result in a more predictable and equitable approach to funding our education system? We have done our homework, and the answer is yes. Throughout the legislative process, we did extensive cost modeling. We built budgets. We adapted the plan based on educator input. We engaged independent national experts, and their review, which was based on research, data, and best practices, confirmed that the plan does what Vermonters expect. It puts teaching and learning first. It aligns with education and management best practices. It directs more resources to students and staff. And it balances Vermont's values of community and a statewide commitment to equity. The resulting bipartisan bill, Act 73, represents one of the largest education investments in the country when compared to education spending from other states. Vermont is on the cusp of something really special. A generational investment combined with generational change means that we can maintain smaller elementary schools through staffing while shifting resources to create more robust middle and high schools. We can expand mental health and behavior supports. We can enhance electives and special programs, and we can even create new, innovative pathways for high school students. It all sounds good, right? And yes, it is possible, but only if we are willing to change. That change requires moving to larger districts, not just for the sake of redistricting, but to be better stewards of taxpayer dollars and to ensure that our investments reach students and teachers. Let's be clear, larger districts do create economies of scale. Scale that can determine whether a school can offer advanced courses, hire that reading coach, or afford a strong continuum of support. Ultimately, education transformation is about Vermonters coming together to acknowledge our challenges and tackle them collectively. Right now, local communities are fending for themselves. The status quo has put local school boards and districts in a difficult position where staffing and programming cuts are being made and schools are being closed, all while property taxes continue to rise and families continue to be priced out of local communities. We cannot ask local communities to fend for themselves. We cannot ask local communities on their own to boost educational outcomes while bending the cost curve of funding education. We cannot ask a fragmented structure to deliver world-class results. We have to do this together. Change is very hard. Of course it is. But Vermonters have shown we can do hard things by coming together. Let's come together to follow through on the bipartisan plan to build the best education system in America, a plan that puts students before politics, raises teacher pay, and creates opportunities and programs that rival every other state in the country, because our kids deserve nothing less.
We'll now open it up to questions.
Governor, given this double-digit increase that we're talking about, are you planning to propose another use of general fund money to buy down the property tax rate in
Yeah,
FY27?
obviously, we're contemplating that. We're building our budget now. Obviously, it's not as though it's money that we just have set aside for some purpose for education. There are other needs in our state, so it's got to come out of another pocket, from some other pocket. So we're contemplating that as we build our budget.
A few weeks ago, you had mentioned or alluded to potentially replacing members on the redistricting task force so they would deliver maps to you. Where do we stand with that?
Well, obviously, their charge was to draw new maps, new districts, and they didn't do that. So at this point, I've talked with the speaker about this. We're going to contemplate where we go from here. But the speaker understands we need the maps.
Can you, or maybe Secretary Saunders, you mentioned that there's overwhelming data to support that consolidation creates economies of scale, which creates savings. Can you maybe point to where the data is, or sort of Is that AOE data, or is the data public maybe?
There is no question that larger districts will allow the dollars to go further to best impact students. In terms of the specific data, we have done extensive modeling throughout the legislative session, and we have built model budgets that demonstrate explicitly how we would operationalize the funding to support the quality of educational delivery expected in Vermont. So all of that has been on the record over the last legislative session and includes extensive data modeling to prove that point.
Governor, do you have an indication of the likelihood of establishing a special committee in order to redraw the maps?
I think we'll have to do something. Obviously, we would like to take part in that. We had one choice for the district committee, and we think that at this point we'll need to balance that out with the legislature, the executive branch, both the House and the Senate and the executive branch, to come up with something that will work for all of us. I think we all understand we have to do this.
Do you have maps that are ready to go that you think are the right?
You know, we're fortunate to have the Agency of Digital Services set us up with an IT structure that you could just implement different strategies. And when you look at, everything that you have to adhere to, and I'll let Zoe talk about this a little bit more, but all the, the number of students and so forth, and the number within the state, there are very few choices. We came up with 5, as you remember from the beginning, and but we're willing to go from there and come up with something that works for everyone involved. So do you want to comment on that any further?
Just to mention that mapping tool is very helpful, but I also want to clarify that the charge for the redistricting task force was very clear. They had very clear parameters around how to draw those lines, and we have a tool that supports us in providing a number of different districts, and look forward to continuing that collaboration with the legislature to understand which configuration can best support the goals that are already established in Act 73. But the parameters have been clear, and they're clearly defined because those parameters were developed in order to deliver on the quality outcomes that we have written into Act 73.
I just want to clarify, the redistricting task force, so the closest they could get was the CTE model, which I think in the northwest part of the state would have put 22,000 students in a school district, which I think also flies in the face of what Act 73 had envisioned. So what does the ideal map, I guess, look like?
So the CTE map was the only one that adhered to the parameters of Act 73, and it's certainly a starting point. When invited to the table, the Agency of Education had some recommendations for how to further refine that, but I think the point is we need to come together and be clear that the larger districts are needed in order to deliver on our educational quality objectives and to bend the cost curve, and we have clear parameters for how to do that, and we have a number of maps that have been explored over the legislative session that can be reviewed and refined to meet the objectives.
And again, I just want to be clear, the committee that was formed was prescriptive. They had to draw at least 3 maps to present to the legislature. They took it upon themselves, the majority within the committee, took it upon themselves to go in a different direction. Now, they'll have all kinds of opportunity once it gets back to the legislature to either vote against what they brought forward, add addendums and so forth to present whatever they presented this time around. But that wasn't their charge. That wasn't what it was intended to do. So it was disappointing to see, but we'll pick up the pieces from here and move forward.
Members of Republican caucuses in both chambers are talking about legislation that would effectively compel districts to bring down their budget requests in advance of town meeting day. What do you think of that approach?
Well, I think, hearing from the tax commissioner and what we're facing now with the increased costs, it's going to be a difficult year. And it's, so we'll see. I mean, I'm willing to listen to anything, but we've asked school boards in the past to lower their projections, and so that we can live within our means while we do the other difficult work to get to where we don't have to worry about this as much as we are today.
But it doesn't sound like you're, at this stage, inclined to aggressively pursue, say, an excess spending threshold that would take effect in advance of next.
It may be a part of this, but again, I want to work collaboratively with the legislature, with the speaker and the pro tem. We've had a good relationship thus far, and I think it's important for us to get on the same page and agree before we sign on to anything at this point. I think it's really important because we wouldn't have gotten through a last session without all of us talking, understanding, and listening, which is important, and then coming up with something that we could all live with. But again, it wasn't without, there was obviously enough support on both sides of the aisle to pass it, but there were some on both sides of the aisle that weren't in favor of it either. So again, I think it's important for us to work together with leadership in the House and the Senate to come together to figure this out.
It's also an election year, as you know. I mean, what is your confidence level? What's the confidence level that this bipartisan agreement, this coalition that you had last session will be able to hold? Especially, I mean, there's a lot of folks in the education community in rural Vermont, small towns that are really concerned about the direction.
Well, I'd say if you go to the rural communities and even not just rural communities, any community, I think they're concerned about their property taxes as well and the amount of spending. I mean, it's not just, property taxes. You look at all of the other money that comes into the system, to the education, goes into education, purchase and use, for instance, and others. It's a lot of money. So that's been increasing over the years as well. So when we have this money, over $2 billion we're spending for education today. Think about if we could do this, and we're not getting the results we should. Kids, it isn't getting to our kids. It's being used to support the system that's inefficient. So if we could have an efficient system, think about where we could utilize some of the dollars that we might save in other areas like housing and infrastructure, both our highways and so forth. So, we have to look at this as a way for us to bring Vermont, upgrade Vermont in many, many different ways, just by fixing the system itself.
Governor, one of the task force members I spoke with said that as far as bringing down property taxes, they view things like cost drivers such as healthcare and different tax policies just as important as the redistricting work. So, I mean, where do those priorities lie with you?
They will all be discussed, and they're all viable issues. But again, I'd remind you, that's not what was asked of this committee. The committee was asked to draw lines, 3 maps, and present to the legislature for their consideration.
And district leaders, some district leaders I spoke to say they feel like the heavy emphasis on education almost puts a target on their back, like they're almost doing something wrong or something like that.
Well, it's not their fault. It's the system that has been created, and all the things we talked about. The fewer number of students over the years. The system is just not efficient. And I've tried to think of different analogies, and I'm not going to come up with anything brilliant, but I think about a furnace in your home. You live in an old home. There's a lot of old homes in Vermont. And you had this system that is probably 50, 60 years old. The house is a little bit drafty. It's an inefficient, big, huge amount of BTUs it produces. And it uses a lot of fuel. The best thing to do is to tighten up the house a little bit, get a new furnace that's much more efficient and uses much less fuel, and replace it. And that way you save a lot of money, thousands of dollars a year for the average homeowner. So it's the same kind of thing here. We're just need to fix the system so it's more efficient. It doesn't require as much money. That doesn't do anything but, in the case of the house, heat empty space, heat the outdoors, and it doesn't save the homeowner anything.
All right, we'll switch over to the phones now. Keith Whitcomb, Rutland Herald.
Hi, thank you. A little off topic, but I was hearing that the Department of Justice is suing Vermont and a couple other states over election data they said was not sent to them. Does anybody know about that or have a comment or know what's going on with that?
Yeah, this was in regards to, this was months ago, and the Secretary of State had decided not to give the information to the federal government who requested some of the data. So at this point, I think the Trump administration is looking to put more teeth into that, and we'll see where they go from here. But I'm supportive of the Secretary of State, and this is down in her bailiwick, so to speak. So we'll see where it goes from here. But you might want to ask the Secretary of State.
Thank you.
Paul, the Boston Globe.
Hi, Governor. I have two sets of questions related to the Trump administration's new restrictions on Afghan immigrants and other refugees. The first is if you could elaborate on what you said in your written statement yesterday about the contributions Afghan immigrants have made to Vermont's community and economy. And do you see the resettlement of Afghan refugees as important to addressing the state's workforce and demographic crises?
I think, I've been an advocate for increasing our population as dramatically as possible over the last 10 years, and that includes legal immigration. That's why we've asked the Trump administration, the Biden administration, and now the Trump administration again, to send us more refugees. We have experienced a rich relationship with many. The Bosnians seem like that might have been the first up in the Chittenden County area, but we progressed from there, and I think it really does enhance our communities. It brings a lot to the table, and again, as you mentioned, it's not just about the community, but we have workforce challenges, so we need more people, and they have skills, and they're very enthusiastic about acclimating to the United States and to Vermont in particular. So we'll continue to advocate for them, and the Afghans, as I said before in the letter, I mean, they were side by side with our military in Afghanistan, and took a lot of risks in doing so. The least we can do is to support our allies and make sure that we're doing all we can to help them here in Vermont.
I have a quick follow-up question to that, if I could. You said in your statement that it was, quote, reasonable and prudent, unquote, for the federal government to investigate additional security concerns in the wake of last week's shootings of National Guard members. Does that mean you support President Trump's crackdown on Afghan immigration or elements of it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I support the Trump administration's reaction to this. I'm just saying, I mean, anyone in this position, I mean, it was a sad day for us in D.C. when two of our National Guard members were shot. One lost their life, and the other is struggling to recover. So I think it's incumbent upon us to follow through, make sure that we're investigating, to make sure there's no ties to others within the country. And I think you can do that, I would think, fairly easily with the number of people here and the resources we have at the federal level to make sure, just to investigate. I think it's just incumbent upon us to do that. But beyond that, I don't think this one situation should determine how we treat our Afghan population throughout the United States.
So you support additional investigations of Afghans already living in the U.S., but you don't necessarily support pausing or ending immigration programs, for example?
Yes, that is correct. And I would even emphasize that we might want to focus on those who experience military battle in Afghanistan. Maybe not every Afghan refugee would fall in that category. So I think you could quickly narrow the focus. But yes, I think we should continue to provide for those who helped us through many years of combat in Afghanistan.
Thank you.
Tim, Vermont Biz.
Hi, Governor. I'm wondering, last budget session, you suggested cutting universal school meals to save money in the education budget. Is that something you're considering again for this next session?
Yeah, not going to get ahead of our budget proposals, but, you know, I made my case a couple of times. I don't think we should be paying for school meals for those who are affluent. And I think that they can take care of their kids. And this seems like a very regressive tax. And so I believe that that we should do something different. But at this point in time, it's not the highest priority on my list, but it'll be on the list.
I'm wondering if Commissioner Schuldeis, if that was part of in his number crunching, if he has a line item on what that is proposed to be for this coming year.
I think it was 17.6 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was considered consistent with the prior year.
Yeah, it's somewhere under 20. But I think it was
Okay, thank you.
17.6, if I remember.
Thank you, Governor.
Tom Davis, Compass Vermont.
Thank you. Governor, going back to education for a minute, when the task force was announced at the beginning of this process to redraw the map, someone would have to keep their eyes closed the entire time not to notice that they put more people that were either opposed to a change to the education system or voted against it directly in the legislature than they did for it. Given that their mandate was to draw the map, not to make the ultimate decision what the districts would be, it was apparent to a lot of people this was not going to turn out well when you put a bunch of people on a committee to do something they don't want to do. Did either the House or the Senate leaders tell you why they made those selections and if there's some real logic behind it?
Probably a better question for the pro tem and the speaker, but if I could just add my thoughts to that, I believe the speaker in particular was trying to make them part of the process, feel like they had a role to play. And I truly believe she thought that they would adhere to the charge that was given to them, the mission that was given to them. Unfortunately, they did not. So, again, a failed experiment, but we'll pick up the pieces from here and move forward.
If you had to do this again, knowing that, would you have negotiated to make sure that they only placed people on the committee who were interested in drawing a map, whether it was ultimately accepted by law?
I would have wanted a better, more expansive role in the number of people on that committee, if there was going to be any committee at all. Now, when you think about every 10 years, we have to redraw districts from a voting or representation standpoint, and it's always contentious, but it always gets done, and it's done by legislators. So I think if I were to go back in time, I would have advocated for more choices on that committee from the executive branch, but also just making sure that we had legislators that understood the mission and were willing to do what was asked of them.
Last question, different topic. How do you perceive the progress going with the state's assistance in Burlington for better public safety?
I think it's been going very well. We have meetings every single week to talk about where we're at. I'm impressed with the judge. I'm impressed with the special prosecutor. State's attorney there has been very helpful. None of this would have been possible without the active role of the the judiciary and Supreme Court justice in particular. So again, putting all the right people together in one room, and we get good results. And much like what we're trying to do here with education, I think we have to do something similar.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, back to the room.
V-Trans is already pushing back projects and is laying off some folks because of that structural deficit we keep talking about. In the coming years, I think it was mentioned in there, missing out on over $100 million in federal match. What's the fix here?
Well, again, there's a great example. I mean, this is just one of many, but the purchase and use at one point in time all went to the transportation fund. That was changed in the 90s, I believe, and now they get just a small piece of that. So that, I think they've been shortchanged about somewhere around $50 million every year as a result. So if that were in the fold right now, and had been for the last few years, we wouldn't have a deficit in the transportation fund.
It's going to the ed fund right now?
Yeah. There's many. We'll give you a list. I mean, it's eye-opening to see. I don't know if, Bill, if you have, or anybody has that, but it's eye-opening. All the other, it's not just property taxes.
What role should EVs and electric chargers, people coming from out of state, what role, if at all, should they play in that?
Well, we were able to pass something that would pay a certain amount from a mileage perspective with the EVs. So, and we're working on other initiatives as well. But seeing the market for EVs with this current administration in Washington, I don't know as that would derive a lot of money at this point. Joe, I should ask, Joe, do you want to add anything to what I've said or clean anything up?
Thank you very much, Governor. Calvin, I believe that was Calvin. First, let me take you back to the start of your question. You mentioned the revenue downgrade in July and some layoffs and project delays. And I just want to be clear with the listeners that those actions that we took then were due to the economic forecast that was provided in July by the state economists and the joint fiscal economists, and it pertained to the 26 budget. And then if you look forward, as the governor said, the purchase and use tax, I believe it was 1994, when it started to take 1% from transportation for education. And then I think it was 2004 when the legislature decided to take 1/3 of purchase and use from the transportation fund to education. And we've run some numbers, and just in the last 5 years, $220 million has come from the transportation fund to support education. That's $44 million a year on average. And if you looked at that number, if that were match money, those would be state dollars to V-Trans, that would bring down about $1.4 billion total, about $1.2 billion in federal money. So, it's really a scenario where are we really short of money we raise, or is it where we're spending the money we have? And to your last point about EVs, we did institute last January a fee, which was an interim fee on electric vehicles. I think it's about $89 right now. And that was to get us through to 2026 when we look to implement a mileage-based user fee on electric vehicles. We've done a lot of research. We've worked with the legislature, obviously the administration. There seems to be agreement that a mileage-based user fee is as fair and reasonable a way to sort of capture what an EV isn't currently paying, if you will. It is not the end-all and the be-all. If we're fortunate, we might make back what we were not capturing from electric vehicles, but I don't particularly think, and nor do I think anyone else thinks, that it's going to be a panacea for incremental revenue. So, we really need to have a conversation about prioritizing the money that we currently raise, and including, of course, other sources of, we're talking with other states, we're talking with national organizations. There are many, many states that are in the same situation as Vermont is with respect to transportation funding. Construction costs have risen 40 to 60%, and it's just not sustainable with a relatively flat funding stream.
Governor, would you support a legislative change to shift some of this money back to transportation?
Well, I think we should at some point. I've always thought that we should purify the fund, so to speak, but not until we make, these transformational changes to allow us to do so. But at that point, absolutely. I just want to get back to your question before. The 2.2 billion that is, or whatever it is this year, but that's not all raised through the property taxes, and there's more to it. So maybe Sarah can bring us through that.
There's some pretty significant other revenue sources that go to support education in Vermont. This information is available as part of the December 1 materials, the Education Fund Outlook that is part of the consensus process. But in addition to property taxes, there's also the sales and use tax is a revenue source, and that's more than $600 million a year. There is also 1/3 of the total motor vehicle purchase and use tax, which is roughly $50 million in a given year, goes to support education. And then 1/4 of the total meals and rooms tax also supports education, and that's about $75 million a year. So those are some of the larger components. But there's also revenue, as you are likely familiar, from the lottery. And then some other more minor sources, but in all, like my quick math, more than $750 million of other revenue sources that are supporting the education system in Vermont.
Governor, you previously proposed a property tax buy-down construct that functioned more as a bond than a straight buy-down, where anticipated savings, future education budgets would be used as a sort of a debt service payments. Is that something we anticipate putting on the table?
It's not something we've been talking a lot about lately, no. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't do it, it's just that we haven't talked about that.
The governor has a meeting in 1 minute, so you can take maybe one more question.
Just one briefly, Governor. There was news this week about a second grade student from Winooski who was detained by federal immigration agents. I wasn't here. Is it in the Midwest, I think? But is this something your administration is aware of? You've been in touch with?
Yeah, I'm aware of it, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot of power outside the borders, even inside the borders when it comes to ICE and immigration. But I would think that the congressional delegation probably is all over that at this point. So we have not entered the arena because I'm not sure what we can do. If they were here, that's why we advocated for renegotiating our contract with ICE and our federal marshals so that they could stay here in Vermont if they were apprehended and detained.
Governor, do you have any thoughts on non-citizen voting? Montpelier, Burlington, and Winooski all have that, and Mayor Emma Mulvey said on Monday that it should be protected. Do you have any particular thoughts on non-citizen?
Yeah, when we first, I think it was Brattleboro maybe, or maybe it was Burlington, I can't remember, passed a charter change to allow that. I was opposed to it, but after I was overridden, it became okay for that community, whichever one it was. And since then, I've said, if that's what you want, go ahead. I'm not going to push back on it. But I don't think it's the highest priority either.
Are there more adults per kid today than there were in 2000 in the school system?
I would assume so, but I mean, just by the number of kids that we don't have anymore, I would assume that we have more adults. I can get that information for you.
That'd be good.
In fact,
I think our ratios.
We continue to have one of the lowest teacher, we continue to have one of the lowest teacher to student ratios and staff to student ratios in the country.
Are you talking about staff and teachers, or are you talking about adults?
Adults in school.
Oh, so that you're talking about
Per kid.
Teachers?
Yeah.
Okay, and other staff, okay. And your answer was?
When you, we can share that data. It was part of our state education profile report when we analyzed the teacher to student and staff to student ratios, and we continue to have the lowest in the country. So
Is that a good thing?
I think it creates a lot of challenges as you think about funding the system, and we think about equity in terms of paying our teachers and a competitive wage. We see tremendous variation across the state, where our smaller or rural high poverty communities tend to pay their teachers on average $30,000 less. So that creates a challenge as you think about teacher recruitment. And we have a number of teachers that on provisional license that's continued to increase as well.
Thank you very much.